السيدات والسادة، رحبوا معنا مجدداً بالسيد سامويل بيرك من قناة CNN وأعضاء جلسته النقاشية.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back from CNN Samuel Burke and his panel.
Good morning, another CNNer. It's great for me to be up here just after John Defterios. I worked as his producer, and now we get a chance to share the stage occasionally. We're going to be talking about fintech up here and what it means for the financial markets, what it means for the Gulf region. So I want to start by introducing the panel. We'll go one by one, first starting with Dilip Rao. He's the global head of infrastructure and innovation for Ripple, based in New York now. Then to his left, we have Bernard Louis Roch, who's the general partner and co-founder of Truffle. And then we have His Excellency Rashid Al-Maraj, the governor of the central bank here in Bahrain. Abdulaziz Al-Jaouf, who is the CEO of PayTabs, which I'm sure many people know out here. And then lastly, Ori Despo, who's a researcher and co-founder at Aurelius. So I just want to start by asking, what do you think is the big disruptor for the fintech markets? What do you think is the one technology that's going to change things dramatically? Is it blockchain?
Thanks, Sam. Obviously, since I'm representing Ripple, the leading company in terms of the use of distributed ledger technology, I'd have to say that's a big contender. Obviously, there are other technologies as well, including big data, artificial intelligence, and certainly the use of crypto assets is emerging as another new opportunity.
Bernard?
As a venture capitalist with 17 years of experience, I think we're experiencing an incredible moment. It's not just blockchain, it's a global disruption with digitalization of everything that relates to financial industry, but also changes in regulation on a worldwide basis. So what has happened in the and with the advent of internet 20 years ago, I think is probably going to happen in the next 10 to 20 years.
You're the regulator here. So do you take a view on this type of thing? Do you look at it and say, oh, this is the one that's coming the quickest, this is the biggest change that I already see? Or are you agnostic? You sit back and you look and whatever comes, comes.
Well, I think my job as a regulator is not to predict what technology is going to influence the direction of the market. I think my job as a regulator is to create the right environment for any technology to serve the industry in a more reasonable way. Predicting what will happen is a very difficult business.
And does it make you nervous? I mean, we're in a time of great change. Do you want to be the one who embraces that change? The more change, the better. Is more change difficult for a government, any government, not just Bahrain?
Let me share with you what went through us when we started looking at fintech. I think the biggest hurdle for us was the fear factor. For any regulators to think about changes in the landscape sometimes brings a lot of anxiety, because naturally any regulator would like to have stability, would like to have certainty in our work, so that we don't create any kind of risk that could create financial instability. But what we decided in the Central Bank of Bahrain, this coming technology is of immense benefits to the economy of Bahrain. And that's why we took the dive into this. We made the regulations that is necessary for the fintech industry, and we pushed the industry in Bahrain to start looking at this and starting introducing the changes that we think it will help the industry and the economy at large.
Abdulaziz, is there one technology that really you think this is what's going to transform the financial markets?
I think it's not the technology itself. It's what people gonna faster adapt. I mean, and this is what makes us fast. I mean, to adapt a new technology, either a fintech or blockchain, and the industry of finance.
And Ori, what do you see? Is it big data? Is it artificial intelligence? I know you have a different view maybe from the rest of the folks here.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing moving forward will be the availability of data. And what I mean by that is, let me give you 2 examples. Imagine if you had a collection of all the business information over the past 10 to 20 years in the region. And imagine if you could correlate that to different business outcomes. All of a sudden, you can transform how lending occurs, you can transform how insurance occurs, you can make better macroeconomic decisions from a regulator standpoint. And then another example, imagine if you had these mobile wallets. So if you look at WeChat, for example, all of a sudden you essentially have this collection of transactions for an individual, and from there you can create many different types of companies and transform, for example, personal money management. You can also transform lending to consumers. You can transform loyalty programs, how users interact with businesses. So that, in my opinion, that's going to be the biggest change.
Dilip, I can see you want to jump in.
Yeah, I was going to say, really, it's not so much about technology, but what people are doing with the technology. You know, what is the problem they're trying to solve? You know, when blockchain came up on the horizon, people thought it would solve for child poverty and world hunger. It was overhyped. But I think what is happening now is people are knuckling down to very specific use cases. In the case of Ripple, we've chosen cross-border payments as our raison d'etre, if you will, removing the friction in global payments, which then helps power what is really a global economy. So I think once you start to hone down your solutions for specific problems, for specific markets, specific customers, then you start to see real innovation and real change. You know, and to His Excellency's point about regulators, we have seen a lot of engagement from central banks around the world. And that's my role now at Ripple, to work with them. So even in this region, for example, we are working with the Saudi Arabian Monetary Authority, which has created a platform for banks in KSA to try out our technology. So I think central banks see their role as being some of the leaders for changing the infrastructure of payments, because they are key stakeholders. And without their collaboration, you can't bring about systemic change. So we're very encouraged in this region especially.
We're going to be talking a lot about blockchain during this panel. Is there anybody here who does not understand blockchain? I think some people aren't being completely truthful in the audience, because I know this morning we were having breakfast, a lot of people saying, well, I understand it, but I don't totally understand it. It's my job on CNN to report on it, yet every time I'm here, especially speaking with the experts that are here, I say, I didn't know that, or I didn't understand that. So I'm just wondering, Dilip, do you have a good explanation for blockchain? The best explanation I've heard is that it's an electronic ledger that essentially anybody can access, a lot like a Google Doc. So just like at CNN, when we're all working on something, we have a Google Doc, we share it, people can edit it, people can look at it if they have the right access. Do you have a better description than I have to explain blockchain simply?
So I think it really comes down to, firstly, blockchain is a very specific implementation of a distributed ledger technology. And it carries with it a lot of hype, but also a lot of anxiety about it because of the model that it uses. Ripple is focused on the more generic problem of connecting ledgers. So we have created an open protocol called the Interledger Protocol. And the problem you're solving then is reconciling different folks' view of what the truth is. And this DLT technology allows people to share information, as you mentioned, and agree on what the truth is, whether that's for reconciling payments or for reconciling trade transactions, so that starts to become a way for disconnected parties to agree and move on with solving the business problem.
I think, I was going to say, one of the best examples that I've seen, I was just in Dubai, and to get your college transcripts when you need to get them to another university or to your employer, that's always incredibly difficult. And I saw a Canadian company that's working with Dubai's universities to make it so that everybody is using the same blockchain system, the same system that underpins cryptocurrencies, to make it so that anybody can get your college transcripts. And I think this is a really easy, tangible way to understand blockchain. Do you have a better definition than we have, Bernard?
In a few words, I would say it's a decentralized distributed ledger protocol.
Decentralized being the important word there.
There's no one single authority that controls it, so it decentralized distributed ledger to which people can refer as a ledger. And as a consequence, it's a protocol on which we can buy systems and solutions. And these systems and solutions are in some ways revolutionary because they provide a way to address and tackle issues that are not addressed properly today.
Bernard, you have the governor of the Central Bank of Bahrain sitting right next to you, and he seems open. We were talking before, he wants to hear what people have to say. What do you think the role of regulators should be in fintech? Sometimes when I look at blockchain, I don't see any room for regulation because it is decentralized, as you were just saying. So is there a role for the central bank here in Bahrain, for example, to play in blockchain and fintech? Or is this about eliminating those institutions?
I don't think blockchain has to be regulated as a blockchain. It's what you can do with it. It's the application. And what's happening with a regulation in fintech in general, it's not just blockchain, it's been happening over the past 5 years, is a radical change where digitalization is changing the name of the game. So that is what's happening on a worldwide basis. And what I see is that regulators are tackling the changes in very different ways across the geographies. If you take the example of sandbox, there is a sandbox here in Bahrain. There isn't a sandbox in many geographies. If you take the example of Europe, it's been handled in a certain way by the FCA in the UK with 2 rows of sandbox trials. And then in Eastern Europe, you have Estonia, Lithuania, and Luxembourg is somewhat trying to do that. Germany is not in favor of that. In France, they have a different approach. They think that many things, many services can be actually developed with a very simple license. So what I've seen is regulators play a fundamental role, and I've been very impressed with my new experience with Bahrain. It was mentioned yesterday by Chief Executive of EDB, what the Team Bahrain approach. It is my experience. Since I first met the Bahrain representatives in Paris FinTech Forum in January, we've been able to see that it's not just about regulation, it's about being able to access the bankers, the representatives of the development, and all the stakeholders in the ecosystem. If you just have one single initiative, it doesn't work. It's the whole ecosystem. That's really a team work on a global pace. And the advantages is that when you can move that forward with a team that is proactive, then you can handle it.
So regulate the application, not necessarily the actual system, the actual code. You wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I think what matters for us, not how the technology functions, because there will be a lot of these changes from the technical point of view. What matters is what value it brings to improve the quality of the life of the people. In our case, if blockchain is going to give me faster services with less cost, reliability, and delivery to the end point, this is what, at the end of the day, what matters. For me as a regulator, you know, if it is a blockchain or any other technology, it doesn't change the mindset. What we tried and what we have relayed to the industry is that we are open for any new technology when it comes in the fintech space. We are driving these initiatives from the central bank. We started the sandbox. We created a dedicated division within the Central Bank of Bahrain to look after the fintech. We upgraded our regulations to start allowing non-bank institutions to work on this space. We have authorized 7 companies to start working in the sandbox. So we are moving ahead on this direction without spending too much time on what type of technology that is good and that is bad, because this is not our expertise.
Rashid, you mentioned something very important, efficiency. I was speaking to Dr. Aisha, who's the head of the Smart City Dubai, and she said what blockchain really means for her, and therefore what she believes for the people of Dubai, is time. That time is the most important thing we have in our lives. So if you spend your time trying to get your college transcripts, or you spend your time trying to get your driver's license, if blockchain can make all this more efficient, you can have more time. Time with your friends, time with your family, time to discuss things on panels.
I'll give you an example that we are working now with Team Bahrain and introducing eKYC to the industry. You know, KYC is becoming a cumbersome, costly, a difficult process. And we are working at the moment to find a way to remove all this difficulty by working in a system that will help the industry and probably other organizations in Bahrain that might need to have access to KYC.
Abdulaziz, we talk about all the great things that blockchain could do, that cryptocurrencies might do, but in 2017 especially, I was reporting on CNN the millions, if not more, tens of millions, that North Korea may have gotten through Bitcoin. We had the WannaCry virus that infected Windows computers all around the world, and they were being collected in Bitcoin. Many governments, including the United Kingdom, for example, where I live, said that they believed the North Koreans were behind this heist and that they were getting rich off of Bitcoin. Now, does that say to you that if a government like North Korea's government is able to use this, if these reports are correct, that we really need to have a lot of regulation over things like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies?
I think, I mean, I told you inside, it's going to be a fintech or blockchain or cryptocurrency. It's kind of a big bubble. There are a lot of technology coming in. And
bubble means that something's going to pop, that something's going to burst.
There are some technology who will disappear. I mean, it started a year ago, 2 years ago, and they would disappear. Same thing with cryptocurrency. There are a lot of names in cryptocurrency started and then they taken off. I think what really gonna disrupt the market or the technology, it's what kind of platform we need to bring to the market or to the users today. I mean, Ripple or other companies, they are bringing a platform where us as a payment company, we will add efficiency, will add speed to the transaction, and the regulator then will come and see which one is gonna have the longevity to stay, where they're gonna add the regulation. So yeah, regulator is required, and we want them to put all the regulation for us to grow this technology after the technology started.
So you as private enterprise see the importance of being able to give access to the governor of the central bank of Bahrain so that they can make sure that the money isn't being siphoned to a place like North Korea?
I want my money to be protected, and I want others of my enterprise business to be protected as well.
Dilip, I can see you want to jump in.
Well, I think Ripple's position is certainly that the space needs regulation. And typically, when you come to issues of money laundering, it's about the entry and exit. And typically, that money is going to come through cash or is going to come through a banking system. And therefore, I think that parties that allow that onboarding for the trading of crypto assets, exchanges, need to be regulated, and there needs to be clarity on what they can do, whether they're meeting the KYC requirements, etc. There are obviously different use cases for these crypto assets. The original dream of Bitcoin was that you'd use it to buy things on the internet. At a transaction fee of $15, I don't think anybody's using Bitcoin to buy coffee on the internet or at a cafe. So our position with XRP, which is our crypto asset, is that there is no requirement for consumers to use these. We think fiat money works really well. But XRP can be a digital asset for use by sophisticated financial institutions, either as a bridge currency to reduce volatility, or as a way to replace nostro balances in accounts all around the world, because that's what facilitates liquidity for payments. So these are still opportunities for banks to explore, and I think as long as regulators provide a safe house in which these experiments can be conducted and trialed, then the end game might be that there is a transformation in terms of reach to the underbanked, being able to deliver remittances very cheaply, let us say from Bahrain to India, because today, still, the cost of cross-border remittances, the cost of cross-border trade is far too high. And if that can be made closer to zero, fast, 24/7, we should try every kind of technology or every kind of solution to achieve that goal.
Dilip, am I correct in also assuming, I'm talking about the negatives, you know, the possibility of a North Korea getting a lot of Bitcoin, but could it also make it easier for somebody like Rashid to do his job, Bitcoin? Does it make the markets easier to regulate because you have this standardized electronic ledger so he can see if somebody is laundering money, if something bad is happening?
So typically, I guess the technology allows you to go back to the person who initiated the transaction, who are all the parties to the transaction. So if you have better KYC in terms of when people create their accounts, then you can track it back to the original person or entity. So I think, so go back to my point about regulating exchanges, if they meet the KYC requirements, frankly, then central banks will have more information than they have today at a more granular level than with current fiat technologies.
Ori, I want to talk to you a bit because I know that blockchain isn't necessarily your thing, but we're talking here, everything that we're talking about is data. Blockchain is a form of data. You look at a company like Facebook, who's going through arguably the biggest data scandal in history right now over something that was pretty silly. If you think about that, they were giving information, which is their most valuable commodity that they have is our information, and they were giving it to people for free. Facebook wasn't even making money when they were giving away this information to the professor in Cambridge who had this quiz. I want to link these two because what we're talking about here is financial data, which is, of course, has to raise questions about privacy. What do you think that we've learned from this Facebook scandal? And by God, if the biggest company on earth when it comes to social media, 2+ billion users, is still learning this lesson, what can we learn, even if it's the basics, about data protection, including protection of financial data?
Well, I think the first thing we can learn is that data can be used in incredibly powerful ways and in ways that we don't even know, like it's influencing us. Especially, like, for example, we're looking at the election marketing. People had no idea what was happening to them, that they're being psychologically manipulated based off of personalities created by their own data. So I think that's the first thing. Like, people, consumers have to be aware that whatever information they're giving will be used for both positive and negative ways, in ways that they'll have no idea. The second way, and then we're talking about like regulation,
if I can just ask you to keep your microphone closer to your mouth. The acoustics are hard in here.
Sorry. The second thing to keep in mind when we're talking about like regulation, even with data or fintech, is that there should be like standardized frameworks across hopefully the world, but at least in this region. Because when you think about like the opportunities to go and create companies in a region, like you're looking at market sizing, right? So there's a bunch of little countries in the Middle East, right? Saudi Arabia has the biggest market of 30 million people, but even then, compared to the US, that's really not that many people. So if you can create standardized regulatory frameworks about know your customer, about compliance, about lending, banking, then you can create this area to be much more attractive as a place to create fintech companies.
Abdullah, go ahead. I can see you want to jump.
I think it is important for us with a view that we will allow and encourage and promote fintech. But at the same time, I would like the people who are involved in this technology to understand that the regulators have certain responsibilities when it comes to the protection of consumer rights, the KYC issues. You know, the recent story or fiasco about data being used by Facebook created a serious challenge to governments and regulators and know how to ensure that with the technology penetrating in details of our lives, at the end of the day must be certain caps to protect consumer affairs, consumer interest, and at the same time provide certain safety. And I think this is where we have to be very careful and know not to expect that the regulator will turn a blind eye about this kind of behavior.
Bernard?
Yes, I think it is extremely important. And just as the fintech and the global financial industry is being changed and disrupted, I think there is a global change in regulation as well. And the regulators are very much impacted. As you are referring to data protection, you know that in Europe, within 2 weeks from now, there will be the GDPR implemented throughout the territory.
We've heard a lot about Facebook and Google having to comply with this European regulation now.
Absolutely. And what is very interesting is that the philosophy of each and every regulator is very different. And in Europe, you will have regulators that have a very slow motion type of reaction to the changes. So the categories, like defining fintechs with categories, crowd lending, alternative lending, insurtech, are already obsolete. And on top of that, there are supra-regulators. The EBA, European Banking Association, wants to develop a sandbox with a European regulation, but at the moment they are relocating from London to Paris, so they don't exactly know how they should do that. What I would like to say is eventually what is important, and not all regulators will be able to do that, is the interaction, the dialogue. I feel that when you are actually talking to the fintechs themselves, then you're making the right steps, you're doing the right thing, and not all regulators will do that. Sometimes it takes 3 months to make an appointment, and because you don't feel into a predefined category, they won't know how to regulate you. So dialogue is eventually the ultimate business model for regulators, and I'm convinced that it's going to happen, but at different paces.
I'm about to open it up for questions, so if anybody has any questions, raise your hand in 1 second. But before that, just one more question for the panel. Dilip, what are the opportunities for the GCC in fintech, in changing these markets? That's why we're here, and I'm sure that's what most people in the audience want to know is, how can I profit off of this being in the GCC region?
So certainly speaking to our experience, so I've been running the APAC MENA business for Ripple for the last 3 years. The take-up of our solution in MENA has been faster than any other region in the world, which is quite amazing.
Is that because the systems are newer, so they're easier to change? Why do you think the adoption's happening so fast?
So I think there is a sense that there is a strategic vulnerability that countries in this region have, and if they can build a platform for transactions to be conducted across the region using a peer-to-peer technology as from Ripple, then it can help build a set of rails on which you can drive different cars, different trucks, whether it's for corporate trade, whether it's for SMEs to import and export, whether it's for e-commerce. And this technology is very cheap and cheerful. So the Arab Monetary Fund has just allocated $100 million to build an Arab payments network. Frankly, with that money, you can build a network within 2 to 3 years for the entire region. And I think the central banks and the commercial banks see that as a strategic opportunity to build the latest technology for real-time 24/7 trade to occur in this region.
Abdulaziz, when you look out in the Gulf region, do you think there's a chance? It's all about efficiency, blockchain. So in my mind, I'm thinking, are people going to lose their jobs? You know, will this make it so you don't need as many people giving you your university transcripts? Or do you think that there's a real opportunity for this region to profit off of blockchain and the other fin technologies?
I think the market here, I mean the region, is really untapped yet. There are a lot of fintech opportunities still to be taken, and people will not lose their job. There are other jobs will be created for the different era of fintechs. So I believe strongly there are more, I would say, opportunities and even profitability to be making in this market.
I'd like to open it up for questions. If there's anybody who has a question, raise your hand. Okay, somebody over here. I'll come. Okay. Can you just tell us your name first, who you are, what you do?
My name is Anil. I come from Oman. Money laundering is a major issue which regulators in many markets look at. Okay, there are a lot of shell companies through which money is transferred, and the recipient and the initiator, these people, I know, there are a lot of ways in which you can avoid paying taxes and those kind of things. Now, with this new technology, is it going to be better in combating money laundering, or I mean, one is you're talking that the costs of doing transactions is going to decline with the adoption of new technology. The regulators, obviously, they will be concerned about scams and these kind of things. So they will not be willing to, approve the changes so fast. So with respect to money laundering, what kind of impact this new technology is likely to make?
Yeah, I don't know who's the best person to answer, so feel free to jump in. But our friend from Oman has the same question that I've had about so much of this. Will it make it easier, or will it make it harder to launder money? Dilip?
So let me answer that question, since our solution specifically focuses on cross-border payments, and that's where the most regulation applies in terms of AML, CTF. So the way banks are using our solution is to enable more information to be shared between the transacting parties. So if you see that you're transacting with a bank that is a higher risk bank or a higher risk country, you can actually ask for more information. Today's systems...
So Rashid can ask for more information if he sees that somebody here is interacting with a high-risk bank.
Correct. So it allows banks to tailor the information requirements for the particular corridor, for the particular party that they're dealing with, allows you to see the end beneficiary, and allows both parties or multiple banks in the chain to do the screening before the value moves, which is different to the way things work today. You send a message on SWIFT, and then the value transfer happens through batch transactions being updated across every ledger. So you only find out at the end of the day whether you want to continue with the transaction or not. So in our model, you do all the screening up front, and if it doesn't pass, you basically kill the transaction before it goes ahead. So we think there's more granularity, more information, richer data for risk assessment.
Okay, that's the positive, but Bernard, is there potential for negative? What could be a negative side of blockchain and money laundering? Could it make it more difficult?
Well, it's maturing. The market is maturing. So it's just like a bit like cyber security. The technologies for protecting, the technologies for security are improving every day. So anti-money laundering technologies are progressing. However, I don't think it's a fair statement to say that we will eliminate money laundering, just as we will not eliminate threats in cyber security. It's progressing, so it's becoming more and more hard. It's becoming more, you have to be more and more sophisticated, if I may say so.
Any other questions from the audience? If not, I have a few more questions myself, so we'll keep on going. Abdulaziz, I'm wondering, what more needs to be done in this region to fast track and leapfrog development? What more do you want to see as somebody in private enterprise done in this region, from governments, from businesses as well, from universities maybe, to make sure that development moves at the fastest pace possible?
I think, and I always say this, I mean, as he said, the regulator here really got impacted much stronger and faster than the banks themselves. And I mean, Bahrain, for example, started their sandbox. In Saudi, they started their Fintech hub. So there are a lot of development coming from the regulator. I think what we want to see is more support from I would say, banking industry to adapt and be more dynamic. And of course, I mean, this is create, I would say, space for universities, for college to start to train and coach students and new graduation people to adapt such technology, where we created an entire ecosystem for giver and taker to start something in the market.
It's interesting. I know that you didn't say university first. You mentioned it, but when I'm in Europe or when I'm in the United States, when I talk to tech companies, I would say their number one complaint, or the number one thing they want to change, is talent development. But here in the Gulf, I don't always hear that. Is it because you think there are other needs that are more important, or do you think it is relatively easy to acquire talent, engineers in the Gulf region?
It's not easy here. I mean, the way we do it here is we hire fresh graduates and we train them for month to a year to fit into our platform and start to understand what we're doing.
That's a long time.
Yes, it's a long time, but it's kind of an investment way for us in our human capital.
Bernard, what do you think that they can do in the Gulf to keep this innovation moving faster? It's a competition, really, to see which country, which region, which city can out-innovate the other.
It's a new industry, the fintech industry, so I think there is a room for places in the world to become leaders and hubs. And in my experience, I've been extremely interested, and I would say attracted, and this is a reason why I have come here, not just for the conference, but also for everything that's happening in Bahrain. In a matter of several days, you can meet representatives of the banks, of the authorities. It's easy to set up a company, and also there's a willingness and commitment to develop fintech. So that's how you create a hub, and a hub will have an international dimension. So of course it will serve the Gulf, but my belief is that if the investment is carried on in the coming, in the very short term, there is room to create a financial and fintech hub that will have a global reach, and beyond the Gulf, attract talents. We've seen companies that are able to set up shop here in a matter of months and attract talents. So you can do that. So that's what is interesting. That's why I'm here. I'm sort of very fascinated by that.
Do you mind if I jump in here real quick?
Please.
Look, so one of the key themes in fintech right now is this thing called the unbundling of the bank. So if you think of banks traditionally, they've done everything from lending to wealth management to savings accounts, all of those things. If you look in the US right now, fintech right now is saying, let me take each part of one of those banks and let me create $1 billion company off of that. And one of the biggest areas is in this idea of risk assessment, insurance, lending. But in order to do that better in the way they're doing that in other places in the world, you need data, right? The problem with the Middle East right now, it's data poor for businesses and for users. So people need to go in and create the key data platforms to collect that information so you can make better lending decisions, so you can make better insurance decisions, provide more consumer financing options and business financing options. That, to me, is the biggest thing that needs to happen, along with regulatory help.
Dilip?
You know, 20 years ago, I started the first person-to-person payments company in Australia. A total population of 24 million. Let me tell you, it is really a struggle to make it viable and large enough to succeed. Once we went to the US, we found that the whole thing took off because of the huge market there. I think the opportunity in this region is there's no one country other than Saudi, you know, which is like 33 odd million. So rather than have fintechs struggle to sell in Bahrain, in Kuwait, in the UAE, in Saudi, if you could create a common market by having a similar set of regulations so that the same fintech innovation could easily be leveraged across the whole region, I think that would enable scaling and would create more chances of success for fintechs rather than competing for different markets.
Please.
I mean, this is an evolving industry, and I can tell you that maybe for the first time, the GCC governors decided to have a fintech dedicated teams. And this issue is becoming a permanent issue on the agenda of every meeting of the GCC governors. This reflects the interest from the wider markets here in the GCC to move forward with the fintech industry and facilitate the adoption of fintech industry within our sector. For us in Bahrain, in a span of 1 year, I have seen a huge change in mindset of the industry. When we started last year promoting fintech and asking the bank to become more friendly, so to speak, there was a little bit of hesitation. And I think the message from the central bank that if you are not going to do it, we'll bring people from outside to do it. So now, after we made so many steps, the sandbox, the fintech bay, and the regulations, I see more and more interest from the banks to start to have a share of this evolving industry. So I would expect in the next few months, we will see more active and rigorous movements towards new ideas, new interests, not necessarily related to the banking industry, but to the insurance, to probably non-bank institutions.
It's certainly great to hear, Governor. Appreciate that.
Before we wrap up the panel, I just want to remind everybody you have the Gateway Golf app to keep track of what panels are coming up next. You've got social media, which will be up there in a second. You can use the hashtags on Instagram and Twitter. And today we're going to have lunch sponsored by Kuwait. Dilip, Bernard, His Excellency, Abdulaziz, Ori, thank you very much for joining us on the panel today.
Thank you.